They thought my paralyzed feet were the end, but winter wouldn't wait for my weakness. Dorje, the YAKUT elder, felt the frozen air tear at his lungs as the sinister howl of 7 gigantic polar bears, each weighing over 700 kilograms, echoed across the tundra. His special sled glided over the treacherous ice, carrying him straight to the valley where the village's last reindeer herd was cornered. Hunger was already tightening its grip, children coughed, and he, the man who could barely walk, was the only hope against imminent death. But what would he do when he stood face to face with the white fury, unable even to flee? The question echoed in the icy air, but not on Dorje's lips. It lived in his heart, a silent challenge he accepted. His feet might be immobile, but his mind, that was an unshakable fortress, forged by decades under Yakutia's white sun and starry nights. He pulled the reins with his gloved hands, feeling the familiar tension in the muscles of his arms and shoulders, the only ones that still obeyed him with the strength of his youth. The dogs, his loyal companions, sensed the urgency in his silent command, their steps firm and synchronized on the packed snow. The biting wind whipped his face, transforming his exposed skin into a mask of ice. Each breath was a needle in his lungs, but Dorje did not falter. His deep, wise eyes scrutinized the white landscape, searching not just for the path, but for the signs. The ancients taught that the tundra spoke, and he was an attentive listener. He looked for rock formations, for cracks in the ice, for any irregularity that nature might have sculpted to serve his purpose. The natural labyrinth of ice blocks was not a legend. It was a reality he needed to find, a silent ally against the predator's fury. In the village, smoke from the fires lazily rose into the grey sky. The women gathered around the stoves, their nimble hands preparing what little food remained. With each crackle of burning wood, a sigh escaped. Anya, Dorje's eldest granddaughter, had a face etched with worry. She watched the door of her grandfather's tent, now empty, a cold void in the familiar landscape. "He is strong, but 7 bears, Anya," a neighbor whispered, her eyes downcast, avoiding the young woman's gaze. "And his legs." Anya pressed her lips together, a knot in her throat. She knew the village's hope hung by a thread as thin as the ice covering the river. But she also knew her grandfather's strength, the wisdom that shone in his eyes, even when his body failed him. Dorje, oblivious to the anguish in the village, smelled fear in the air, a subtle scent the wind carried from the cornered reindeer, and mixed with it the heavier, wilder scent of the bears. It wasn't the smell of meat, but of presence, of raw power. He was drawing closer. The valley lay ahead, a dark depression in the white vastness. His fingers tingled with cold, but he used them to adjust the reindeer hide that covered him, protecting him from the penetrating chill. Each beat of his heart was a mantra, for the village, for the children, for life. Suddenly, a movement. A gigantic shadow stood out against the snow, distant but unmistakable. One of the bears, then another, and another. They moved with terrifying grace, like mountains of white fur across the tundra. Dorje felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a cold, sharp determination. He had found his labyrinth, a tangle of ice and snow formations that rose like natural walls, perfect for his strategy. Now it was time to lure the white fury into the trap. His dogs whimpered softly, sensing the proximity of danger, but maintained their pace, trusting the elder who guided them. Dorje smiled, a thin, almost imperceptible smile. The dance with death was about to begin. Dorje wasted no time. With a firm tug on the reins, he directed the dogs onto a route that would take him around the reindeer herd, keeping a safe distance, yet visible to the predators. He knew the scent of reindeer meat was a potent lure, but what he needed was the bear's curiosity and hunger directed at him. Not directly at the herd yet, The dogs, trained for hunting and survival, understood the maneuver, their bodies tense but obedient, their yellow eyes fixed on the path ahead. The sled glided smoothly, almost a white ghost over the ice, leaving a subtle trail. Dorje used a small piece of dried meat, which he kept for emergencies, and tied it to a long rope, dragging it through the snow. A subtle trail, yet irresistible to such keen noses, a tempting promise in the frozen air. The bears, which had previously moved with majestic slowness, now raised their massive heads. Their muzzles sniffed the icy air, and their small, dark eyes fixed on the solitary figure on the sled, who seemed to defy them. A low growl, deep as the tremor of the earth, echoed among them. A guttural symphony of hunger and impatience. It was the sound of primal hunger and the promise of an easy meal. Dorje felt his heart pound in his chest, a constant drum against his ribs, but his mind remained clear, sharp as an ice blade. He was not prey. He was a guide, a shepherd of predators. Slowly, with calculated movements, he began to move towards the ice labyrinth, a tangle of formations that rose like irregular walls, some as tall as ancient trees, sculpted by wind and time. In the village, the silence was almost palpable, broken only by the crackling of fire in the tents. Anya, sitting beside her grandmother, tried to sew a reindeer hide, but her fingers trembled and the needle seemed to slip from her hands. "He is so brave, Grandma," she murmured. Her voice choked with anxiety, her tear-filled eyes fixed on the empty doorway. The elder woman, with deep wrinkles that told stories of countless winters and overcome losses, merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames, as if seeking an answer or a sign within them. She knew Dorje's courage didn't come from recklessness, but from an unshakable faith in the wisdom of his ancestors and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. The entire village in their hearts prayed for Dorje, for his cunning and for his life, feeling the weight of hope in every beat of their own hearts. Meanwhile, Dorje felt the weight of the 7 bears on his back, the overwhelming presence of over 4,900 kilograms of pure predatory instinct following his trail. They were closer now, their heavy footsteps breaking the snow crust, the sound reaching Dorje's ears like distant, threatening drums. He could feel the icy breath of one of them, or perhaps it was just the biting wind carrying the wild scent. But the sense of danger was real, vivid, almost palpable. He entered the labyrinth, the walls of ice and snow closing around him, creating a narrow, winding corridor where the wind howled differently, trapped. The dogs were tense, their fur bristling, but they trusted Dorje, sensing the calm in his firm hands on the reins, a calm that was the foundation of their own courage. The bears hesitated for a moment at the entrance to the labyrinth. It was strange territory, tight and claustrophobic for their massive bodies, accustomed to open vastness. But the promise of food was too strong to ignore. With a powerful shove, the lead bear, a mountain of white fur with ancient scars that told its own battle stories, forced its way in, followed by the others, who squeezed between the ice walls, their movements slower, more awkward, fury growing in their eyes. Dorje smiled again, a victorious smile that didn't reach his eyes, which remained focused on the next turn, the next move, planning every step of the trap. He was guiding them exactly where he wanted, transforming their brute strength into a weakness. With each turn, each narrow passage, the bears became more frustrated, more trapped, their heads swiveling in search of an easier exit. The dance was intensifying, and Dorje, the maestro, was in control, even if his legs couldn't move. He was the mind, the will, the hope of the village, weaving a path of salvation through ice and snow. Dorje, his mind sharp as the ice that surrounded him, continued to guide the predators through the labyrinth. He knew every turn, every narrow gorge, every ice block that rose like a silent sentinel. There was no haste in his movements, only calculated precision. The dogs, sensing the change in the elder's energy, responded with renewed agility. their steps light and quick, gliding between passages that barely allowed the bears through. Dorje, with a slight flick of his wrist, sometimes sped up, sometimes slowed down, dictating the pace of the chase. The bears, in turn, grunted in frustration, their massive bodies crashing against the ice walls, scratching them with their powerful claws, but unable to break through the natural barrier. The scent of the dried meat Dorje dragged was a constant torment, a promise that always seemed to escape. The lead bear, its fur stained with snow and ice, let out a thunderous roar, a sound that reverberated through the ice formations, making the air vibrate. It tried to force a wider passage, but only managed to wedge itself further between two gigantic blocks, its flanks painfully scraping against the sharp ice. The other bears, confused and irritated, began to shove each other, creating a chaos of white bodies and furious growls. Dorje watched the scene with silent satisfaction. It was exactly what he expected, brute force transforming into a disadvantage in the environment he had chosen. He knew that patience was a weapon as powerful as cunning. In the village, night fell, bringing with it an even more intense cold. Stars twinkled mercilessly in the black sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Anya, unable to sleep, left the tent and looked out at the vast darkness of the tundra. The wind howled, but she heard neither the sound of the bears nor the barking of her grandfather's dogs. The absence of news was a heavy burden. Her grandmother, sensing her granddaughter's unease, approached and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He is like the river, my daughter," the elder woman said, her voice soft but firm. "Even when frozen, the current still flows beneath. Dorje always finds a way." Anya turned, her eyes full of unshed tears. "But what if this time the ice is too strong, Grandma? 7 bears." Her grandmother merely squeezed her granddaughter's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort worth more than 1,000 words. Dorje, in turn, felt weariness begin to weigh on his shoulders, but adrenaline kept him alert. He had led the bears along a tortuous path, far from the herd, exhausting them with the futile chase. Now it was time to turn the tables. He spotted a narrow, almost invisible crevice that he knew led to a wider passage, but which the bears, in their haste and frustration, would likely ignore. With a subtle command, he directed the dogs towards the crevice. The sled slid through it with ease, disappearing from the bears' sight for a brief moment. The predators, hearing the sound of the sled moving away, redoubled their efforts, growling and shoving each other to try and follow the trail. But the crevice was too narrow for their immense bodies. They tried, with blind fury, to squeeze through, but only managed to injure themselves on the sharp edges of the ice. The lead bear, with a grunt of pain and rage, finally gave up, retreating with difficulty. The others, seeing their leader's failure and feeling the exhaustion of the chase, also began to lose momentum. The promise of an easy meal had transformed into a labyrinth of frustration and pain. Dorje, now on the other side of the crevice, watched them through a small opening. His eyes shone with the light of victory, not a victory of brute force, but of intelligence and patience. He had broken the bears' hunting spirit, transforming their hunger into weariness and resignation. The village would be safe. Dorje leaned back in the sled, feeling the weight of exhaustion as never before. His muscles screamed, his arms trembled, and the cold seemed to penetrate every bone in his body. But a different warmth, the warmth of victory, radiated from his chest. The bears were now just distant shadows, their massive forms slowly retreating across the tundra, defeated not by brute force, but by the cunning of a man who could barely walk. He watched until the last white figure disappeared into the icy mist, a deep sigh escaping his lips. The reindeer herd, though still frightened, was safe. The village's life, for now, was secured. A solitary tear ran down his wrinkled face, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief and silent gratitude to his ancestors and his loyal dogs. With immense effort, Dorje turned the sled, the dogs responding to his command with unshakable loyalty. The journey back seemed even longer and more arduous. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, but the promise of a new day did not lessen the biting cold. Dorje felt the pain in his paralyzed legs, a constant reminder of his physical vulnerability, but his mind was filled with images of the safe herd and the relieved faces of his people. He thought of Anya, of his grandmother, of the children waiting. This was his strength, the engine that propelled him through the ice and darkness. Each pull on the reins was an act of love, each meter traveled, a promise fulfilled. The dogs, exhausted but determined, maintained a steady pace, sniffing their way back home. In the village, night advanced, and Anya's anxiety reached its peak. She and her grandmother sat near the fire, but the warmth couldn't ward off the chill they felt. The other women of the village were also in their tents, trying to find solace in sleep, but many eyes remained open, fixed on the shadows. Anya couldn't forgive herself for having doubted even for an instant her grandfather's ability. 7 bears were a terrible threat, and Dorje's paralysis seemed an insurmountable barrier. But he had left, and hope, however faint, still burned in her chest. Suddenly, a distant bark broke the heavy silence of the night, a familiar bark. Anya lifted her head, her heart pounding. Her grandmother, who seemed to have fallen asleep, opened her eyes, and a faint but hopeful smile appeared on her lips. The bark repeated, closer now, followed by the soft sound of a sled gliding over the snow. Anya ran out of the tent, the icy wind whipping her hair. There, against the grey backdrop of the emerging dawn, he was. Dorje. His body was hunched, covered in snow and ice, but his eyes, though tired, shone with an unmistakable light. The dogs, exhausted but proud, stopped in front of the tent. The silence that followed was broken by Anya's muffled cry of relief. "Grandpa!" She ran, stumbling in the snow, and knelt beside the sled, her hands trembling as she touched Dorje's arm. Warm tears streamed down her face, mixing with the ice. Other villagers, drawn by the bark and the cry, began to emerge from their tents, their faces marked by disbelief and then by contained joy. Dorje looked at his granddaughter, his eyes moist, and a genuine smile bloomed on his lips. "The village is safe, my dear. The herd is secure." His voice was hoarse from the cold and effort, but it carried the authority of a victorious leader. Anya's grandmother approached, her eyes fixed on Dorje's, a silent understanding passing between them. She touched her husband's gloved hand, a gesture of love and admiration spanning decades of shared life. The villagers, now gathered around the sled, murmured words of gratitude and reverence. Dorje's figure, fragile in his sled but imposing in his victory, was living proof that true strength lies not in muscles, but in an unshakable mind, ancestral wisdom, and love for the community. He had faced the impossible for everyone, reaffirming that the human spirit, driven by altruism, overcomes any adversity. Hope had returned to the village. The contained joy soon transformed into a wave of human warmth. The villagers, with tears in their eyes and smiles on their lips, surrounded Dorje's sled. Gentle hands carefully lifted him, carrying him into his tent. Anya, her face still wet with relief, ran ahead, opening the entrance. The air inside the tent, warmed by the fire, felt like an embrace after the biting cold. Anya's grandmother had already prepared hot herbal tea. She helped him settle into his bed of furs, covering him with thick blankets, while Anya untied his frozen hides. Every gesture was laden with unspeakable love and gratitude. Dorje, exhausted, closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth spread through his body. The hot tea gently burned his throat, bringing immediate comfort. He opened his eyes and met his grandmother's, who watched him with infinite tenderness. Her gaze said it all: pride, relief, and a love that had endured countless winters. Anya, sitting at her grandfather's feet, held his wrinkled hand, massaging it gently. "Grandpa, you are a hero," she whispered. Dorja smiled, a smile that reached his tired eyes. "I am not a hero, my dear. I am just a man who loves his village and remembers the teachings of our ancestors." He squeezed Anya's hand, a gesture of connection that transcended age and experience. Outside, news of Dorja's victory spread like wildfire across the tundra. The villagers, previously full of doubt, now gathered in small groups, their faces illuminated by admiration. Elder Semyon, a respected hunter, shook his head. "We doubted him," he said, his voice choked. "We thought his legs had weakened him, but his mind, it is stronger than any bear." The women nodded, their eyes fixed on Dorja's tent. The story of how he lured the 7 gigantic bears into the ice labyrinth using only his cunning and the loyalty of his dogs would be told for generations. Faith in humanity's ability to overcome the impossible had been restored. The young people, filled with renewed energy, were already preparing to retrieve the herd. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast a golden glow over the snow, transforming the previously somber landscape into a picture of hope. Hunger, which had been a constant shadow over the village, began to recede. The promise of meat, milk, and furs for the winter was a balm for weary souls. The children, who had felt the weight of scarcity, now played in the snow with renewed vigor, their laughter echoing through the icy air. Life, which seemed to have teetered on the brink of the abyss, had been pulled back by the courage of one man. Dorja's village, once on the verge of despair, now breathed an air of relief and gratitude. Inside the tent, Dorja, though weak, felt the energy of the village. He heard the murmur, the joyful voices, the barking of the dogs. His grandmother helped him sit up, and he looked at the fire, the flames dancing. The victory was not just his, it was everyone's. It was proof that even when the body fails, the spirit can soar. His paralysis did not define him. His courage, wisdom, and love for his people did. He had shown that true strength resides in the mind and heart, and that human connection was the greatest shield against desolation. Dorja's village was a beacon of hope, illuminated by the flame of human resilience. Winter was still long, but the darkness had been driven away by an act of love and triumph. A tranquil smile rested on his lips as he drifted into a deep sleep. Dorja sank into a deep sleep, a sleep of exhaustion and relief, as the gentle warmth of the fire and the unconditional love of his family enveloped him. Every muscle in his body cried out for rest, but his mind, finally at peace, allowed the darkness of sleep to take him. Outside, the village began to awaken to a new day, laden with renewed hope that spread like the warmth of the rising sun. The celestial body, now high in the sky, painted the snow with a golden, promising glow, and the air, though still icy, felt lighter. As if the weight of the night had been lifted, the young people, led by Semyon, the respected and strong hunter, were already enthusiastically preparing for the journey to retrieve the herd. Their faces, previously marked by anxiety and fear, now displayed a joyful, almost euphoric determination. They arranged their smaller sleds, carefully checked the dogs' reins, and equipped themselves with the warmest and most durable furs, ready to face whatever came. Anya, after ensuring her grandfather was well settled and breathing calmly, joined her grandmother in the tent, helping to prepare breakfast. The comforting scent of hot herbal tea and cooked dried meat filled the air, bringing a sense of normalcy that had been lost. "They will bring the reindeer back, Grandma," Anya said, her voice full of a certainty she hadn't felt in days, a glimmer of optimism in her eyes. Her grandmother nodded slowly, a soft, thoughtful smile on her wrinkled lips. Yes, my daughter, Dorje opened the way with his courage and wisdom. Now it is the young people's turn to follow and complete the task. Her eyes, however, carried a shadow of concern, an ancient wisdom that knew even the greatest victory did not eliminate all the dangers and whims of the vast and relentless tundra. The young people departed with songs and shouts of encouragement, their sleds gliding swiftly and confidently over the untouched snow, leaving behind tracks that would soon be erased by the wind. The entire village watched, waving their gloved hands, their hearts full of gratitude and renewed faith. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in cold shades of purple and grey. The cold intensified, and the anticipation in the village began to transform into a subtle, growing unease. The herd was not that far, and the young people should have returned, or at least sent a messenger to reassure everyone. Inside the tent, Dorje awoke, feeling a little stronger, but still with a sore and heavy body. He heard the unusual silence outside, a silence that was not of peace, but of apprehension. "Have they returned with the herd yet?" he asked his wife, who was beside him, her eyes fixed on the tent entrance. Anya's grandmother shook her head, a knot in her throat. "Not yet, my love. I'm starting to worry the wind is stronger." Suddenly, a distant sound cut through the icy air. It wasn't the joyful barking of returning dogs, nor the celebratory shouts they expected. It was a sharp, desperate howl, followed by an abrupt and terrifying silence. A chill ran down everyone's spine in the village, and many hearts quickened in panic. Anya ran out of the tent, her heart pounding uncontrollably in her chest, fear chilling her veins. Her grandmother followed, her steps slow but firm, her expression grave. Soon they spotted a solitary figure approaching in the white vastness, one of the young men, running with difficulty. His face pale and contorted with fear and exhaustion. He could barely breathe when he reached the village, falling to his knees in the soft snow. "Semyon, the herd, the ice labyrinth." He gasped, his words lost between sobs and the frozen air. "It's collapsing. The bears. They damaged it with their fury. There's no way through. And Semyon, he got trapped trying to clear a path." A sepulchral silence fell over the village, heavier than the snow itself. The hope of minutes ago dissolved into panic and despair. The ice labyrinth, which had been the village's salvation, was now a deadly trap, swallowing its young men and the future of the herd. Dorje, hearing everything from his tent, felt a tightening in his chest, a pain that was not physical but of the soul. The victory had been incomplete, a breath of relief transforming into a new nightmare. The danger had not truly passed. He needed to do something, but his body was still weak, his muscles screaming in protest. His mind, however, was already working tirelessly, seeking a solution where no one else saw one, a way out of the new abyss that was opening. The turning point had arrived, and the village would need his wisdom once more, perhaps more than ever, to face this new and unexpected adversity. The young man's desperate cry echoed through the village, cutting the icy air like a knife. "Semyon, the herd. The ice labyrinth is collapsing. The bears damaged it with their fury. There's no way through. And Semyon, he got trapped trying to clear a path." The words, broken by sobs and gasping breaths, fell like heavy stones upon the already fragile hearts of the villagers. A sepulchral silence settled, denser than the icy mist that was beginning to rise. Hope, which had blossomed with Dorje's return, withered in an instant, replaced by a chilling panic. Anya felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Her grandfather had risked everything, faced the impossible, and now salvation seemed to be collapsing upon them. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, seeking strength in the figure of her grandmother, who remained by her side, her face pale, but her eyes fixed on Dorje's tent. Inside the tent, Dorje heard every word, every sob of the young man. An icy grip seized his chest, a pain that was not physical, but of the soul. The victory, so hard won, had been incomplete, a breath of relief transforming into a new and even more terrible nightmare. Semyon, one of the strongest and most respected hunters, trapped in the labyrinth he himself had used as a trap. And the herd, the life of the village, still in danger. He tried to stand, but his muscles, exhausted from the previous journey, protested with sharp pain. His body trembled, and the weakness was overwhelming. But his mind, his mind. It was already working tirelessly, seeking a solution where no one else saw one, a way out of the new abyss that was opening. He could not fail, not now. Anya's grandmother, sensing her husband's silent anguish, knelt beside him. Her eyes, full of ancient wisdom, met his. "You heard, my love," she whispered, her voice choked. "They need you. Semyon needs you." Dorje closed his eyes for an instant, feeling the weight of all the village lives on his shoulders. The image of Anya, of the children, of the hungry faces, passed through his mind. It was his family, his people. He opened his eyes, and in them was an unshakable determination, stronger than any physical weakness. Outside, the villagers began to approach Dorje's tent, their gazes lost, seeking in him the light that seemed to have gone out. Elder Semyon, now trapped, was a symbol of human fragility before relentless nature. With immense effort, Dorje leaned on his wife's arms and with her help managed to sit in the sled. Every movement was torture, but he didn't care. His eyes swept over the crowd gathered at the tent entrance. Their faces, previously full of joy, now displayed silent despair. "Bring my dogs," he ordered, his voice hoarse but firm, cutting through the silence. "And prepare the sled. We need to go." Anya, who had approached, knelt beside him, her eyes moist. "Grandpa, you can barely move. It's too dangerous. The labyrinth is collapsing." Dorje touched his granddaughter's face, a gesture of affection and comfort. "There is no other way, my dear. Semyon is there, and the herd. I guided them there, and I will get them out. No one else knows those ice blocks like I do." He looked at Anya's grandmother, who nodded, understanding the depth of his decision. The villagers, hearing Dorje's order, began to move, a new wave of hope, however faint, coursing through the community. They knew that if anyone could do the impossible, it would be Dorje. The women prepared more tea, more furs. The men, with tools in hand, began to check the sled, reinforcing the bindings, preparing it for the new and uncertain journey. The dogs, sensing the urgency in the air, barked, ready to follow their master once more, their loyal eyes fixed on the elder. The village, once again, placed its faith and its future in Dorje's hands and mind. The villagers, with a mix of dread and renewed hope, moved with urgency. The women hurried to wrap Dorje in more furs, covering every gap against the relentless cold. Anya, her hands still trembling, helped her grandmother tie the sled's straps, her eyes fixed on her grandfather. She saw the paleness in his face, the exhaustion present, but also the unshakable flame in his eyes. Anya's grandmother, with firm and loving gestures, offered Dorje a piece of dried meat and strong tea. He accepted, feeling the minimal energy from the food. Semyon, who had doubted Dorje, now depended on him. It was a cruel irony of the tundra. The dogs, sensing the seriousness of the mission, barked with renewed energy, pulling the sled out of the village. The sun hid behind heavy clouds, and the wind began to howl, stirring up snowflakes. Dorje, reclining on his bed of furs, felt every jolt like a stab. But his mind was clear, focused. He visualized the ice labyrinth, every crevice, every block. He needed to find Semyon and a new route for the herd. The responsibility weighed heavily, but determination propelled him. He looked at Anya, who ran alongside, her eyes wide with worry, but also with courage. The journey back was more arduous than the previous one. The wind, a furious force, tried to blind them, and the freshly fallen snow made the terrain even more treacherous. The dogs struggled against the gale, their barks muffled by the wind's roar. Doria, his hand firmly on the reins, guided them with the wisdom of one who knew every secret of that white desert. He thought of Semyon, imagining the young hunter's despair trapped between the cold, unstable ice walls. The image of his granddaughter and wife gave him strength. It was the hope of the entire community that was at stake. With every meter, the cold seemed to intensify, but Dorje did not yield. Finally, the irregular outline of the ice labyrinth emerged from the mist. It was not the same as Dorje had left it. Gigantic blocks had given way, creating new crevices and unstable piles of ice. It looked like a battlefield, where the bear's fury had left its devastating mark. The air was charged with the sound of cracking and groaning ice, a constant warning. Anya gasped, covering her mouth. It was worse than the young messenger had described. Dorje's heart tightened. He spotted Semyon, trapped between two enormous blocks, his body hunched, his hands trying in vain to push away the ice. The young hunter's face was blue with cold and fear, his eyes fixed on Dorje, pleading. Dorje signaled for the dogs to stop, his eyes scanning the chaotic landscape. He needed calm, precision. "Semyon!" he shouted, his voice tearing through the wind. "Are you hurt?" The young hunter shook his head, coughing. "Only the cold, Elder, and fear. I can't move. The ice is crushing me." Dorje realized that the block trapping Semyon was cracked and could give way at any moment. He needed to act fast, but any false move could trigger a collapse. Anya, beside her grandfather, felt Semyon's despair, the fragility of the situation. The tears she had held back now streamed freely down her face, freezing into small pearls. Dorje closed his eyes for a brief instant, seeking ancestral wisdom. He remembered how ice behaved. He opened his eyes, and in them was a new light, an idea. "We need strong ropes and the ice axes," he ordered, his voice now stronger, full of authority. "And we need silence. Every step must be calculated." The villagers who had arrived shortly after heard and moved, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and renewed faith. The task was monumental, but Dorje's presence, his sharp mind and unshakable spirit, was the only hope. The ice labyrinth, now a deadly threat, would be confronted once more by the cunning and courage of an elder. Dorje, his eyes fixed on the unstable ice that trapped Semyon, began to give instructions, his voice calm and precise. "The ropes," he said, pointing. "Tie them firmly to the most stable blocks, away from the collapse area. We need a secure anchor point." He turned to Anya and other young people. "With the ice axes, carefully create small crevices in the ice. We don't want more cracks, just enough for the ropes." Anya's grandmother, Serene, organized the villagers, distributing tasks and dispelling panic with her calm. Anya, holding the ice axe, felt her heart in her throat. The ice before her seemed alive, groaning and cracking. She looked at Semyon, who trembled with cold and despair. Her eyes met Dorje's. His granddaughter saw deep compassion there. Her grandfather risked everything, not for himself, but for his people. The strongest men with the ropes moved cautiously, testing each step. The silence was almost absolute, broken by the howling wind and the sounds of the labyrinth. Dorje, from his sled, observed every movement, his mind calculating weights and tensions. He knew the ice was treacherous, the slightest vibration could be fatal. "Slowly," Dorje murmured, gesturing. "Distribute the weight evenly. The ice beneath Semyon is like a spiderweb." The tension was palpable. The cold penetrated their bones, but adrenaline kept everyone alert. Anya, following the instructions, delicately drove the ice axe into an indicated spot. The sound of metal on ice was sharp, but she concentrated, creating a small crevice for the rope. Her fingers were numb, but she didn't stop. Semyon, so vulnerable, spurred her on. As the ropes were secured, Dorje explained the plan. We will use the ropes to create a lever system. We cannot pull the block that traps him directly. It would collapse. We need to relieve the pressure from the block above him, and then, with ice axes, open a side path. He pointed to a narrow crevice. It's a risk, but the only way to get him out without a major collapse. The villagers exchanged glances, the magnitude of the task revealing itself. It was a dangerous dance with nature, where one mistake could mean the loss of Semyon and perhaps others. But their faith in Dorje was unshakable. They had witnessed his wisdom. Now it was time to trust and act. Semyon, seeing the complexity of the plan and the dedication, felt gratitude and shame. His life was in the hands of the elder he had underestimated. Dorje, feeling Semyon's gaze, offered a reassuring nod. We will get you out of here, my son, together. The elder's voice, though low, carried the strength of 1,000 winters, the promise that the community would leave no one behind. The first rope was tied, taut, vibrating in the wind. The rescue began. The first rope was tied, taut, vibrating in the wind. The rescue began. Under Dorje's guidance, the strongest villagers, with tense muscles and faces marked by apprehension, began to pull. It was not a brute tug, but a calculated movement, a gradual relief of pressure on the unstable block that trapped Semyon. Every fiber of the rope groaned, and the ice responded with sinister cracks like ancient bones breaking. Anya watched, her hands clasped against her chest, her gaze fixed on her grandfather. She saw the effort in his pale face, the way he leaned in, concentrated despite his weakness. Dorje's wisdom was the only compass in that labyrinth of danger. Slower, brothers. Dorje's voice cut through the icy air. The ice has its own breath. Feel it. He gestured with his gloved hands, indicating the direction and intensity of the pull. Anya's grandmother beside him murmured words of encouragement, her presence a balm for agitated hearts. Semyon, with tear-filled eyes, watched the scene, a mixture of relief and guilt on his frozen face. He had doubted, but now he saw the elder's greatness. As the pressure was relieved, Dorje instructed Anya and other young people to use the ice axes to open the side path. Carefully, my little ones, just enough for Semyon to slide through. Do not disturb the base. Anya, with the ice axe in her hand, felt the biting cold, but Dorje's determination propelled her. She drove the metal tip into the ice, feeling the resistance, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Each strike was an act of faith, a step towards Semyon's freedom. Suddenly, a deep, prolonged groan came from the heart of the labyrinth. The ice block trapping Semyon visibly trembled, and a new crack, thin as a hair, snaked across the surface. A muffled cry escaped Semyon. Panic threatened to take over. The villagers stopped, their eyes wide with horror. The ice was giving way. Dorje, despite his weak body, reacted with surprising speed. Don't stop. Pull hard, but with control. Anya, faster, open the way. His voice, though hoarse, was a whip that cut through the fear. Anya, with tears streaming down her face, redoubled her efforts, her ice axe striking the ice with desperate but controlled fury. The men pulled the ropes, their muscles trembling, their teeth clenched. It was a race against time, against the relentless nature of the tundra itself. The ice block above Semyon gave way a little more, and he let out a groan of pain, the air thin in his lungs. I'm trapped. I can't breathe. But the side crevice, thanks to Anya's and the others' precise strikes, was opening. Dorje, with superhuman effort, pushed himself closer, extending his hand to Semyon. Hold on, my son, we're almost there. With a final desperate pull on the ropes and the last ice axe strikes that opened the crevice enough, the ice block trapping Semyon seemed to sigh, and the pressure on him eased sufficiently. Semyon, with a cry of relief and pain, managed to slide out, falling into the arms of the waiting villagers. The ice, as if having fulfilled its part, cracked one last time, and the block that had held him collapsed with a deafening roar, seconds after his liberation. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Semyon was free, exhausted, injured, but alive. He dragged himself to Dorje, kneeling in the snow, tears streaming. "Elder, I am so sorry. Thank you." Dorje touched his shoulder, a faint smile on his lips. "Now, Semyon, we need the herd." But Semyon's liberation was only the first part. The ice collapse had revealed something more, a new and even more terrifying sight. The path to the herd was completely blocked by a mountain of unstable ice, and in the distance dark shadows moved. The bears, they were back. The true climax was just beginning. Despite his exhaustion, Dorje did not hesitate. His eyes swept over the unstable ice mountain and the dark shadows moving in the distance. The bears, closer, their imposing, hungry silhouettes unmistakable against the white tundra. Semyon, gasping and trembling, dragged himself to the sled. A new flame of determination, mixed with shame and gratitude, shone in his eyes. "Elder, what will we do? The herd, trapped, and the bears." His voice choked, the weight of his failure crushing him. "Calm, my son," Dorje whispered, his voice hoarse but soft. "Despair is a colder enemy than the tundra." He looked at Anya, who clung to her grandmother, her face pale, her eyes fixed on him. Her grandmother, with silent strength, squeezed her granddaughter's hand, conveying courage. Dorje closed his eyes for an instant, his mind working at dizzying speed. The new ice mountain, once an obstacle, was now an opportunity. The ice that had collapsed, creating that blockage, had also created new crevices and passages. He remembered ancient stories of how the tundra, in its fury, always offered a path to those who knew how to listen to its secrets. He opened his eyes, and an audacious plan began to form. "Semyon," he said, his voice firm, "you know this labyrinth. You know where the herd is. We need to guide them to a new exit, one the bears cannot reach." Semyon, his head bowed in respect and acceptance, nodded, the guilt still visible, but the will to act stronger. "Yes, Elder, there's a narrow passage to the north, but it's treacherous, and the ice there is thin." Dorje smiled faintly. "Exactly. The bears with their weight won't dare, but the herd with care can cross, and we, with the help of the dogs, will guide them." He looked at the villagers, who awaited his orders, their faces a mixture of apprehension and fragile hope. "We need ropes, torches, and all the dogs we can gather. The bears must be distracted while the herd moves." Anya's grandmother, understanding the urgency, began to give orders to the women, who quickly lit torches and prepared more ropes. The men, led by Semyon, who now moved with renewed energy, began to gather the dogs and test the side passages. Anya, with the ice axe still in her numb hands, ran to help tie the ropes. Her movements, previously hesitant, were now firm, driven by her grandfather's unshakable determination, a courage she didn't know she possessed blossoming in her chest. Dorje, from his sled, pointed directions, his mind a living map of that icy desert. The older dogs, with the most experienced men, should position themselves at the main entrance of the labyrinth. Light the torches, make noise, shout. The goal is to keep the bears distracted, away from the passage the herd will use. Do not confront them, just deceive them. He knew that the bears, though hungry, were cautious of fire and noise. The idea was not to fight, but to trick. While the distraction was being set up, Semyon, with a group of younger men and dogs, entered the labyrinth through the side passage Dorje had indicated. The silence was broken only by the howling wind and the distant barks of the dogs distracting the bears. Dorje, with Anya and her grandmother by his side, waited, the tension palpable. He knew every second was precious. Suddenly, a guttural roar echoed, closer than expected. One of the bears, more cunning and hungry, had noticed the maneuver and was heading with heavy steps towards the narrow passage, its eyes fixed on the promise of food. Anya's heart pounded. "Grandpa, he's coming!" Dorje, unfazed, pointed to an unstable ice block above the passage. "Anya, use the ice axe. Just one strike at the weakest point. We need to block the passage." With trembling hands, Anya ran, driving the ice axe with all her might into the exact spot Dorje had indicated. The ice groaned in protest, cracked with a sharp sound, and with a deafening roar that made the tundra tremble, collapsed in a controlled avalanche, blocking the narrow passage seconds before the bear could reach it. The animal, frustrated, let out a roar of fury, batting its front paws against the new and impassable ice barrier. Shortly after, Semyon emerged from the side passage, followed by the reindeer herd, which moved with urgency but safely. The villagers' faces lit up with relief and gratitude. The reindeer, guided by the dogs and men, began to move away from the labyrinth towards a safer valley. Dorje, exhausted but with a victorious smile on his lips, watched the scene. The village was saved, the herd was secure, and life pulsed again. True resilience, Dorje knew, lay not in the brute strength of muscles, but in the cunning of the mind and the unshakable courage of the spirit. Family, community, the essence of life in Yakutia, all had been defended, not with violence, but with wisdom and unity. The bear's roar of fury, muffled by the new ice barrier, was the last sound of threat that echoed in the labyrinth. In moments, the other 6 bears, confused and frustrated by the loss of their easy prey, began to move away, their imposing silhouettes diminishing in the icy mist. The distraction created by the villagers and dogs had worked perfectly. The herd was safe, sliding into the security of the valley. A collective sigh of relief, deep and sincere, echoed among the villagers. Their faces, previously tense and pale, now lit up with a mixture of exhaustion and pure joy, like the sun finally breaking through the clouds. Dorje, leaning back in his sled, felt the weight of the entire journey. His muscles ached, his head throbbed, but a gentle warmth radiated from his chest, warming him more than any fire. He had succeeded, not with the brute strength that age and paralysis denied him, but with a sharp mind, with wisdom accumulated over long and countless winters. He looked at Anya, who ran to embrace him. Her tears of fear transformed into tears of pride and love. "Grandpa, we did it!" she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. He tenderly stroked her hair, a tired but genuine smile on his lips. "Yes, my flower. Together, we will always find a way." Semyon, who had guided the herd with renewed determination and a sense of purpose, returned, his shoulders bowed no longer by defeat, but by the weight of responsibility fulfilled and lessons learned. He knelt before Dorje, not in submission, but in deep respect and admiration. "Elder, there are no words for my gratitude. I doubted your wisdom, but you showed us the true path. You saved all of us, and you saved me too." Dorje extended his gloved hand, and Semyon squeezed it firmly, feeling the elder's silent, unshakable strength. "The lesson, Semyon, is that a man's strength is not measured only by his strong arms, but by his ability to see beyond the obvious, to trust in community and the human spirit." Anya's grandmother, with her wise and welcoming gaze, watched the scene with a sparkle in her eyes. She approached, covering Dorje with more warm furs. "You are the heart of this village, my love, the spirit that guides us and keeps us united." She didn't need many words. The love, admiration, and reverence in her eyes said it all. The journey back to the village was different. There was no longer desperate urgency, but a calm, victorious rhythm cradled by hope. The villagers sang soft songs of gratitude, their hearts light and full of a new faith. The reindeer, now safe in the protected valley, would be sustenance for the long winter ahead. Hunger had been driven away, and life, once again, had prevailed. Upon reaching the village, they were met with shouts of joy and relief that echoed through the ice houses. Children ran to embrace their parents. Women wept with happiness and gratitude. Dorje, raised in his sled, was the center of it all, a silent hero whose presence radiated peace. He sought no praise, only the certainty that his people were well and safe. That night, beneath the aurora borealis dancing in vibrant hues across the dark sky, the village gathered around a crackling bonfire, sharing what little food remained, but with full hearts. Dorje, though exhausted, felt complete and at peace. He looked at Anya, who watched him with new eyes, understanding the depth of his wisdom and the weight of his legacy. He looked at Semyon, now a young leader, transformed by experience and ready to guide. The community, united and resilient, had overcome the impossible once again. Dorje's story would spread throughout Yakutia, a tale of courage and cunning that would echo for generations, inspiring everyone. True strength, he knew, lay not in muscles, but in an unshakable mind and spirit, in the ability to adapt, to innovate, to protect those we love with our whole being. In the relentless vastness of Yakutia, where winter froze even the soul, Dorje's village had found not only food and security, but a renewed faith in humanity and its own capacity for overcoming. Life, in its beauty and brutality, always found a way, especially when guided by an altruistic heart and an unshakable mind. The future, though uncertain and full of challenges, was now filled with the promise that together they could face any winter, any adversity, with the same courage and wisdom. The future, though uncertain and full of challenges, was now filled with the promise that, together, they could face any winter, any adversity, with the same courage and wisdom. The morning that followed the rescue dawned with a different silence, no longer the oppressive silence of fear, but a reverent quietude, punctuated only by the crackling of bonfires and the soft howl of the wind. The sun, still low on the horizon, painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, reflecting on the ice and snow, transforming the icy landscape into a picture of hope. In the village, the scent of roasted reindeer meat hung in the air, an aroma that in itself was a song of victory. The children, previously pale and frightened, now played in the snow, their laughter echoing, a sound Dorje hadn't heard so clearly in weeks. He watched everything from his sled, positioned near the main bonfire, a blanket of warm furs enveloping his tired body. His eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, shone with a deep peace. Anya, sitting beside him, rested her head on his shoulder. She didn't need words. Her grandfather's mere presence, the warmth of his body, was comfort enough. She felt the silent strength emanating from him, a strength that would not bend before any adversity. The fear that had paralyzed her in the ice labyrinth had been replaced by a newfound courage, a flame ignited by Dorje's unshakable determination. She knew that from then on she would carry that flame with her. Semyon, with a bandaged arm and his face still somewhat marked by the cold, approached bringing a steaming bowl of broth. His eyes met Dorje's, and a nod, laden with respect and gratitude, was exchanged. "Elder," Semyon said, his voice hoarse, "the herd is safe. The dogs are exhausted but well, and the village breathes again." He sat humbly, observing the elder with a reverence he had never shown before. The lesson had been learned, etched in fire and iron upon his soul. He had seen true strength, that which resides in the mind and spirit, and not merely in muscles. Anya's grandmother, with her serene smile, sat on Dorja's other side, holding his wrinkled hand. "You brought us back from the brink of the abyss, my love," she whispered, her eyes moist. "Your wisdom is our beacon." Dorja squeezed her hand, a gesture of love and complicity that spanned decades. They had built this community together, and together they would keep it standing. The villagers, one by one, approached Dorja, not to praise him with grand speeches, but with small gestures, a touch on the shoulder, a warm smile, a look of deep gratitude. They had witnessed something extraordinary, and the experience had united them in a way that danger alone could not. The community was now stronger, more cohesive, forged in adversity and triumph. Dorja closed his eyes for an instant, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the warmth of gratitude in his heart. He was not just an elder confined to a sled. He was the guardian of ancestral wisdom, the link between his people's past and future. True resilience, he knew, was not just to survive, but to flourish, to find beauty and purpose even in the most brutal conditions. And Yakutia, with its relentless winters and wild beauty, was the perfect stage for this truth. That morning, under the vast tundra sky, Dorja's village did not just celebrate the salvation of its herd or the defeat of the bears. It celebrated the unshakable strength of the human spirit, the deep connection that united them, and the promise that as long as there was wisdom to guide and hearts to love, life would always find a way, even in the frozen heart of the world. Dorja's legacy would not just be a story told, but a truth lived by every member of that resilient community.